bring my man in. We are joined, and I want to make sure I nailed this on the first go. David Hundeyin. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I am great. Thank you very much.
And it is Hundeyin, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, nailed it. Because see, that's the thing, right? When I'm here, they will say Jamari, and I just say yes. Okay, that's fine. Because from their point of view, the way they put their words together is different. It's supposed to be Jamaro, Jamari.
Yeah.
They're like yes. I know you're talking about. But I do want to get names right. For some reason, I want to say Hundeyin, and in my head, it makes the switch. That's wrong. Hundeyin. Just for the audience, David Hundeyin, investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and his 2023 James Carey Fellow at Cambridge University. Thank you for joining me, man. You doing okay today?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Always, man, always. When you are looking at news recently, what is the thing that has bubbled up is, from your take, one of the most important items that the West doesn't necessarily get to see, but is holding relevance? And it could be the continent of Africa or a specific space in Africa like the Sahel. What are you focused on currently?
Well, there are a couple of stories, but I guess the one that has my attention currently isn't actually from the Sahel. It's from Nigeria, and it's basically there's a sort of meme slash story making its way around the public space that says that Nigeria has exited the IMF program. So basically, Nigeria doesn't owe any money to the IMF
That's
any
good.
longer.
That's
Which sounds like great news. It sounds like great news, right? And then the flip side of that is Nigeria is now the world's third largest debtor to the World Bank and Africa's largest debtor to the World Bank. So basically, money has been shuffled around on the books. So the Nigerian government is going around spreading this meme that somehow we're fiscally responsible. We've taken Nigeria out of indebtedness to the IMF. So we're not, in actual fact, Western puppets because we've taken Nigeria out of IMF indebtedness. Meanwhile, Nigeria has become the most indebted country on the entire continent of Africa to the World Bank. Right? Nigeria has about 40-something billion dollars worth of World Bank debt, which is just so basically it's like borrowing from the World Bank to pay off the IMF.
Borrow from Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah. So essentially, that's what the state of Nigerian public finances have been reduced to. So they're basically shuffling money around the books to try to make things look a certain way. And this is sort of connected to that. It's not exactly the same story, but it's connected to that. As parts of their drive to raise revenue, tax revenue, to pay off these unpayable loans, they've created this new tax bill, which is supposed to come. It's been signed into law, actually. It's coming into effect on the 1st of January next year.
Yeah.
And one of the provisions of this bill, I mean, from an American point of view, you'll find it extremely totalitarian. But one of the provisions of this bill is that from January 1, 2026, no one is going to be able to operate a bank account in Nigeria without getting a tax identification number. And in addition to that, every transaction, like every payment that moves through your account, every bit of money that goes through your account, your personal account, for some cockamamie reason, is going to be counted as income.
What?
Yeah,
Wait, let me get this right. So any money. So if I move a couch and somebody gives me $50, I put it in my account. They'll say, okay, that's income. It doesn't matter what it is.
First of all, even as it is right now, that $50 is already taxed because every electronic transaction comes with a tax. First of all, that's bad enough. Now, for the purpose of tax assessment, according to this new bill, which has been signed into law, that $50 is going to be counted as income. So there's a threshold below which you're not expected to pay any tax. But the thing is, that threshold is so low that realistically, there's going to be like 10 people who don't qualify to pay tax, basically. So the idea is basically to widen the tax net in a way that has never been attempted in Nigeria's history before. And in addition to that, something else which is also included in the tax bill, which I guess also isn't even around here, people haven't yet cottoned on to it, is that the VAT, that's the value added tax, is being raised from 7.5% to 10%. And this is an IMF instruction. The IMF actually instructed Nigeria to raise it to 15%, to double it from 7.5 to 15%. But then, according to the IMF, and this is in a document published in July, it's on the IMF's website, you can read it. The document said, well, we understand that for the purpose, essentially for the purpose of not starting a civil war, let's not do everything at once. So break it up. So instead of doubling it from 7.5% to 15%, do it from 7.5% to 10%, which is what they've done. And it's going to come into effect from January 1. So basically, from the start of next year, Nigeria, which has already become one of the most impoverished countries in Africa relative to its size, is about to become a lot more difficult to live in. And this is the direct result of multilateral borrowing and the instructions and actions of multilateral institutions. So the reason this story is so interesting to me is I find that it's very difficult to explain to people in these parts that these inconveniences and economic hardships that you experience don't just happen without context. They don't just happen because your leaders are corrupt and your leaders are not knowledgeable. You know, the usual narratives. There's an unseen hand, you know, and it's actually not that unseen if you know what to look for. So that when people like me talk about things like imperialism and neo-colonialism, that this is what it means in a practical sense, right? This is not Kwame Nkrumah delivering a speech. This is not an ivory tower thing that a university professor is talking about in an African studies class. This is a real practical thing. That the reason you're about to become poorer from next year, the reason you might get temporarily locked out of your bank account from January next year is directly because of something, a decision that was made in Washington without your buy-in, without your say-so, without your consent, and over your head. And I think that's just like a really useful way of illustrating to people around here what the reality of imperialism actually is. Because I always find that people from the other side of the Atlantic are often surprised when they engage Africans and realize that Africans have no idea, generally speaking, have no idea what imperialism is. Even though they experience it all the time, they have no idea what they're dealing with or where it's coming from. And the assumption around here always seems to be that somehow African leaders are the absolute worst in the world, that there's some innate moral or psychological or behavioral, societal, cultural deficiency on the part of African people that leads to, you know, poor leadership outcomes. Meanwhile, that's not the case at all, right? The leaders might not be great, but leaders across the world, generally speaking, are not great either. So why is it that this continent specifically has these very unique and distinct set of outcomes compared to everyone else? And this is why. It's because there's a specific economic role that has been set for it, and the people who set that role are the people who are actually in charge. Those are actually the people with power, not the middle management that we call leadership.
Your point is that for all intents and purposes, he's not passing a bill to make people poorer just because he wants to pass a bill to make people poorer. This is on some level being directed from above him, despite the fact that he's in charge of, he's president of the country.
Yeah.
Wow. What has been the response in Nigeria on this? I mean, they have to know that this is A, going to make them poorer. B, is going to have much more government oversight on the way that they spend money, on the way that they accrue money, all of these things.
So I think there's been more of a response to the first point, because I think more people sort of understand the visceral reality of becoming poor. And there's been some kind of an attempt by the government to sort of play down these fears. The Internal Revenue Service has gone on TV to say that, well, they're not going to, you know, unilaterally just shut down accounts, and that where possible, they're going to avoid taking such action because they're going to use existing databases as much as possible to avoid causing disruption to the system. So I think the government is going to play it in a way that it's going to the disruption is going to be minimal, so people might not necessarily realize the extent to which they're being shafted.
Yeah.
However, the second point you made, which I think is actually the more dangerous issue and the more important issue, has just completely flown over everybody. That you are essentially giving power over the most minute details of your life, right? You're giving total power over your life and total visibility over everything you do that involves money, not just to the government, right? Because it's one thing to give it to your government that you voted for, right? That's one thing. But the IT platform, which is being used to integrate this new financial system, is called MOSIP, right? And I'm sure you've heard of it before. MOSIP is essentially an IT platform which is to all intents and purposes founded and owned by Bill Gates,
Are you
right? And
serious? No, I had never heard of this,
yeah,
to be honest with you. I had never heard of it.
right. MOSIP, MOSIP. You can Google it, right? So that's the platform that's been integrated into Nigeria's financial system. This is an experiment that has been attempted before, I believe, in India, right? So essentially, you have this American billionaire who works hand in glove with the American states, the American government establishment,
Yes.
coming to your independent sovereign country in the global south and pushing, using his influence and his money to push legislation through your parliament to create this financial infrastructure that he controls and give it teeth and give it power over your bank account, over your ability to move and spend money. Because the situation now is, technically, because we supposedly live in a sovereign country, even though it's not really that sovereign, but because the financial system in that country isn't under the direct control or supervision of an outsider. So the level of financial freedom that we have is constrained only by what the government locally decides to do.
Right.
And for the most part, the government, to its credit, generally doesn't like to upset the apple cart much. So it has happened a couple of times that the government freezes accounts, and it happens from time to time. But it's not a thing. The government doesn't go around freezing 2 million people's bank accounts. That's not a thing that happens, right? It's one person here, one person there, once in a while. And when people make noise about it, it's quietly reversed. Like, generally speaking, the state does not like disruption to the
Right.
financial system. But what this is going to do is that this is going to give an extra level of power to an outsider. So in addition to the government, there's going to be an external entity which nobody in Nigeria has control or oversight over. That is, at the very least, is going to have full visibility over all financial flows within the Nigerian electronic finance system. And I don't see how people don't immediately recognize this as a huge national security risk, as a huge violation of sovereignty. Like, this has just completely sort of flown under the radar and just gone above everybody's heads over here, because nobody really seems to get why that is such
A big
a
deal.
dangerous situation to be in. I personally, so if a journalist like me, for example, like, I have been accused, obviously, of being Kremlin backed, whatever the hell that means. I've been accused of being pro China, all those things, right? All the word soup that is used to describe someone who is not Western aligned or who is not pro Western,
Yeah.
right? Which I most definitely am not. So currently, it is the case that I'm able to transact in Nigeria. I'm able to move money around. I'm able to do whatever I want, even though the Nigerian government isn't really fond of me, but I still have a measure of freedom in Nigeria, at least financially, even though I'm not physically located there, right? Now, what this would do is that this would effectively give the US government in Washington the ability to financially censor me directly in Nigeria using the Nigerian financial system.
What is MOSIP supposed to even do? I mean, that's the thing that's supposed to give the government, I guess, oversight. Is that
So
what it's supposed to do?
essentially, MOSIP is the God's eye of financial systems, basically.
I
So
see.
It's essentially this huge financial infrastructure, electronic infrastructure that gives whoever is in control of it full visibility and oversight over where money goes, um, with whom, and in addition to giving oversight, like it also gives you control over where money can be allowed to go. So essentially, people can be financially censored. People can be basically unpersoned. So if you remember a time when there used to be a lot of talk about this thing called the social credit system in China,
Right.
which may or may not have existed, this is a social credit system for real. Because essentially, the premise of this dystopian social credit system that we were told was that if for whatever reason the government isn't fond of you, you can basically be turned
They
into
can
a
block your account.
non-person.
They can block your
Yeah,
account. I mean, Canada
you will
was
not
doing
be
it with
able
the
to do
truckers, if
anything.
you remember.
You won't be able to buy tickets to travel. You won't be able to buy food at a supermarket, that sort of thing. This is essentially what the power that MOSIP gives, in addition to taxation, because MOSIP was marketed by the Gates Foundation as a taxation solution primarily. The idea that was used to sell it was that in emerging markets, in developing countries, that a lot of the economy is sort of the gray economy. It's not formalized. So even if people are transacting electronically, it's difficult to know what the purpose of the transaction is. It's difficult to
Right.
know what is going where. So what MOSIP purports to do is to give a state full, like
Clarity.
360-degree visibility over all the money that is circulating electronically in an economy for the purpose of taxation. But the thing is, yes, taxation is one purpose, but how many other purposes can it be used for?
Exactly.
And would I want, certainly in the US, if such a thing were proposed, like it would get shut down like in 5 minutes. No one would want to have
People would
anything
have
to do with it.
feelings about
Yeah,
rando billionaire having full coverage
exactly,
and visibility on your
exactly,
account. And
exactly. But
they're getting paid for that too, right? I mean, he's not giving this for free. I would imagine he's going to
no,
get
of
a
course
pinch of
not.
whatever tax revenue.
So first of all, there's definitely going to be some sort of a cut, I guess. But even more importantly, like it's not the amount of money that he's getting paid that I'm worried about. It's the data. The data is far more valuable than whatever cut of the revenues he's getting. Because think about it. No, at no point in the history of humanity has it happened that a country of this size, we're talking 215 million people. The financial system has, I think, 90 something million bank accounts at least. Or no, I might be overselling it. I think 60 something million bank accounts. So I don't think at any point in time in human history has it been the case that an economic system that big has been essentially in the full control of one person or a tiny group of people who can basically have full visibility over absolutely everything that is going on inside it, and can also decide essentially to switch off pipes and taps where they don't want things to flow to, and basically shape society in a way that society has never really been able to be shaped before. You
David,
know,
that is outrageous. That is outrageous. Who the hell wants Bill Gates having that much oversight over
nobody. But
people's
that's and
finances?
that goes to the heart of the problem, because was this debated in public? No. Did regular people, Nigerians, get a chance to engage in any public discourse, in any consultation about this? No. What simply
So this
happened
was never
was,
even litigated. Like this wasn't even fought politically. It was just agreed upon by the political space.
so it supposedly passed through the House of Representatives and then it passed through the Senate. But the thing is, if there's enough money behind something when it's passing through Nigeria's Houses of Parliament, you'll never hear about it. So what is supposed to happen is there's supposed to be a first reading, second reading, third reading, after which it's adopted in the House. Then it goes to the Senate and first, second, and third reading. Then it's adopted. Then it goes to the president and it gets signed. So the idea is at every point, it can get edited, it can get revised, or it can get shut down. That's the idea behind the system. It's basically modeled on directly modeled on the American system. But what simply happens here is, if there's enough money behind something, the first, second, and third reading will take place on the same day. And then you'll just see in the newspapers the next day that so and so bill passed yesterday. First, second, and third reading, unanimous. Everyone's, and then maybe if they really want to be like mischievous, they'll simply say they did a voice vote. And how a voice vote works in Nigeria's House of Parliament is the speaker says, if you're for this bill, say aye. And then you hear aye. And if you're against this bill, say nay. And it's nay. And then the speaker basically decides whether the ayes or the nays were louder.
It's like the ayes have it.
And so, yeah, the ayes have it. And your entire life can be affected by that little gavel tap. Like, so, like, this is a very opaque, like, profoundly undemocratic way of creating laws that govern people's lives. But some white guy with a lot of money is able to control the system in whatever way that he sees fit. And 215 million Africans are basically going to be his big lab experiment in more ways than one.
Yeah, what the government is saying is, and we can get more tax revenue. That's the only thing they're listening to. Oh, we can get more money. We can get more taxes.
Mm-hmm.
We can make the people effectively poorer by having complete oversight over all of their financial affairs. Wow. Is this being rolled out in any other country?
Something else I should have mentioned is that this was also recommended by the IMF. So the IMF also recommended that this, it wasn't called MOSIP in the IMF document, and it wasn't directly referenced, but it was hinted at that the tax infrastructure of Nigeria needs to be like comprehensively rejigged using like electronic solutions and yada, yada, yada. It's very clear what the document was referring to. So again, this goes back to that thing of a bunch of people in DC who have probably, made all these decisions beforehand in America. They basically gamed this scenario ahead of time. They've run simulations, whatever, ahead of time in the US. And they basically brought it fully formed and imposed it on you wholesale. And because your government is basically the government that they put there, you don't really get a say in the matter. And that's kind of like the situation that we're in now.
That's outrageous. Is this being rolled out in other African states?
It's being planned for rollout in Kenya and I believe Angola as well. But Nigeria, for some reason, is like the pilot project. And Nigeria, for whatever reason, is like one of Bill Gates' favorite sort of petri dishes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. And it starts January 1st.
Yeah.
What is the VAT tax? I got to be, and forgive my ignorance, and the audience can be like, how do you not know what this is? You travel all these places, you have no idea what the VAT tax is. What is the VAT tax? Explain it for me.
So value-added tax is essentially a tax on any sort of finished product. Okay. Or service. So you have, I believe in the US, there is also a VAT. So how, in the US, I believe how it works is that prices of things are displayed and then you add the tax to the display price. The taxes are calculated afterwards. I believe that's how it works in the US. In Nigeria, it's more of like the British system where all that is already factored into the final price that is entered to. So VAT is basically, it's pervasive because it's taxed on fuel, it's taxed on so essentially the meaning of VAT is value added. So any good or service which has gone through some sort of value addition process, there's a tax on it.
So, right? If I refurbish a desk, for example, you bring
so
the
it's
desk.
it's essentially a tax on consumption, which makes it one of the most debilitating taxes for a population with no disposable income, right? Because you're basically trying to tax the consumption of poor people who don't have money to begin with. Poor people who don't consume are being taxed on their poverty, basically. So if you make minimum wage in Nigeria, minimum wage is 75,000 naira a month. That is roughly $50 a month, roughly, give or take. Wow. So if you're making $50 a month, I mean, that's pretty much as bad as it gets already, right?
Yeah.
You probably live in a shack. or you live in like a slum, like a stereotypical proper African slum somewhere, you barely have enough to eat. You struggle with things like sanitation and clean water and things like that. You probably have to work every single day because you probably work a manual job just to survive. So you probably don't have like a monthly salary. You probably have to, you know, get paid
Make
cash
it,
in hand every
you
day
know,
or at the end of the week. And basically the little that you're managing you know, to consume, maybe you buy bread and sardines or something. Maybe not sardines anymore because even those are out of reach of poor people in Nigeria now. So you're basically just surviving, getting and putting enough calories in your system to keep body and soul together. And whatever it is that you are buying
government.
to accomplish that goal, essentially is getting taxed, right? Which
What
is
should
why
they do?
VAT. Sorry.
Like, if you could suggest something to the political space in a way that they would listen. It sounds like the government is doing any and everything in their power to effectively extract additional income from the public. What should they do? I mean, it's not like,
Well,
does Nigeria have control over their resources, for example? Like, what would be
and
another
the
plan?
the answer is not really. It could, but it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because everyone in charge or almost everyone in charge, has been selected, and the selection wasn't done by Nigerians. So essentially, you have a ruling class which fundamentally, and this is not a new thing, this is a thing that goes back decades. You have a ruling class that sees itself as part of the colonial superstructure. So you have a ruling class that fundamentally doesn't see itself as part of a national entity. So these are not nationalists. Nigeria has, I think, in its entire existence as an independent state since 1960, I think there are two, maybe three people of all the heads of state Nigeria has had, more than 11 of them, that you could classify as nationalist in any reasonable sense. The rest of them have just been essentially either direct CIA assets, like the guy who's president now, or people who are just sort of hybrid and they're neither here nor there. They're just sort of trying to placate everyone and keep everyone happy, and their goal is just to stay in power. So
If,
the so that being the case, when it comes to, for example, oil resources or mining resources, what has been the case in Nigeria is that instead of an attempt like what Iran did to fully nationalize its oil industry, or like what Brazil or
right,
Venezuela did, that has never happened in Nigeria. What has happened instead is the Nigerian governments have been fine with Shell or Ajib or Eni or Total or Chevron being the ones who actually do the work, and then they have a joint venture with the state oil company, and that joint venture agreement states that the state supposedly takes 50% of oil revenues that are earned every year, supposedly. Now, you and I know that if some American oil company is doing deep sea drilling, like 100 kilometers offshore within your economic zone, whatever that they're going to declare to you as their revenue or as what they've drilled, right, might be maybe 30% of what they actually did.
yes,
That's how
yes,
it works. So you're going to get 50% of what they declared to you. You're not getting 50% of what has been extracted. You're getting 50% of what has been declared. So in that sense, Nigeria has already been getting absolutely shafted for decades. But at the very least, there was still that reliable revenue coming in from oil. Now, with solid minerals mining, it's significantly worse than that, because what you then have in that space is it's essentially almost like a free for all. So the parts of the country, especially in the north and in the middle belts, where you hear all these reports of violence, armed groups from the Sahel causing all sorts of mayhem, it just so happens, coincidentally, that a lot of this violence happens to be concentrated around these mining areas, especially
right,
where people live, so that
right.
people get driven out, and then places that used to be human settlements are turned into essentially strip mines, right? And a lot of this is happening without any meaningful government oversight. So, who are these entities? We know that there are all sorts of, there are Belgian entities involved, the Chinese entities involved. It's a free for all. and they're all manner of unregistered and unknown airstrips all over those parts of the country. So there was a well, I wouldn't call it a story. It was more like a firestorm on Twitter, which took place some months back, where someone used Google Earth to basically identify the existence of an airstrip that doesn't exist on the map of Nigeria. But it's an airstrip, it's a fully developed airstrip, has its own little, control tower and everything. And it just so happens to be sited next to a well, it wasn't identified as a mining site because
But it was a
officially it
mine.
doesn't exist.
Yeah, but it's
Officially,
a
what's
mine.
on the map? Yeah, officially, what's on the map is that this is supposed to be a factory in the middle of nowhere, and the factory supposedly processes lithium, supposedly. However, that area is rich in lithium deposits, right? And there's this unregistered airstrip, and there's flights going in and out, and there's planes flying with their transponders turned off. This was actually such an issue. I believe it was in 2023. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority actually put out a circular, actually put out a statement to all air operators in Nigeria saying that any aircraft found or any operators of aircraft found to be flying without the transponders turned off, they're going to face sanctions, yada yada, because it's such a thing, right?
Wow.
So kind of like the way you have it in the DRC, where you have the country just hemorrhaging its wealth to God knows who. There's a similar situation in Nigeria, and the Nigerian government, unlike with the oil space where it pretends to be an equal partner, the Nigerian government in this case is barely even present. It barely even
David,
has any presence. So
this is depressing, to put it mildly.
yeah, it should be.
Um, man, I learn something every time you come to the show. And again, this is one of those things that I don't think people really know that they should be aware of. And it also gives kind of context to why the Sahel states did what they did in regards to nationalizing their
Exactly.
resources.
Exactly.
David Hundeyin, thank you for this, man. He's an investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and the 2023 James Carey Fellow at Cambridge University. David, thank you for this, man. You have a fantastic day. You be safe.
You too. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, man. I thank you for coming. All right.